What's up, nerds? It's Havoc, and we're here to talk about the most recent update to Company of Heroes 3, patch 2.1.5. I know I'm a little bit late on the trigger with this one because I wanted to play some games and get familiar with all of the changes before I started giving some hot takes on them. And so we're going to break down all of the patch notes, so feel free to have this on in the background. I'm going to be reading through everything. So no need to pay too much attention to the video if you're more an audio person. I know there's a good chunk of you that have told me that. But anyway, let's jump into it. So starting out, it looks like basically, so general fix here, very nice to see. Auto match cooldown has been removed from the 1v1 game mode. Quitting the match without using the vote to surrender will no longer incur a cooldown penalty. You are free to quit a 1v1 match at any point. Made perfect sense. There's really no reason to penalize a player who has given up in the first 5 minutes in a 1v1 match. It's not like there's any teammates that they're causing any issues with. So this is just a nice quality of life fix. And now we get into the interesting stuff, which is the balance. So starting with the constructible defenses, they said some buildable objects are having their construction time increased to slow down how quickly areas could be locked down or fortified. This makes builder units easier to catch out of position when establishing defenses in frontline sectors. So for tank traps, they increase the build time from 7 seconds to 9 seconds. Sandbags, they increase the build time from 4 to 5 seconds. Barbed wire is increased from 2 to 3 seconds. And reinforced barbed wire is from 3 to 4 seconds. Additionally, they made some changes to signal detection, which is basically the pulse ability on some recon units like the 4x4 Jeep, the 254 recon tractor, the 221 with the radio antenna. They reduced the detection range on these units from 125 to 100 radius. So about a 20% reduction in detection range. This is a welcome change because these units were very easy to position safely and get pretty much all of the intel that you could possibly need on the map. So welcome change on the signal detection side. As for the construction time increase, I'm pretty happy about these because I do feel like units that had abilities to pop up defenses were really powerful, especially in a 1v1 setting. Being able to like jump on top of a key capture point, throw down some sandbags, and really slow down your opponent's ability to contest that sector. It was very frustrating to play against. And I also know some players were doing a really good job of being able to litter certain areas of the maps with obstacles. I do think that what's missing from here is it would be nice for over and above just the simple ability to cut wire, giving engineer units the capability to destroy these fortifications using, I don't know, like a time-based demolition package or something that only is going to destroy world elements, kind of similar to the Sapper ability from Co 2, where they are able to destroy cover. I think we need something like that for all engineers because there are still cases where you basically get locked out of areas of the map and it takes a very long time and a lot of like weapons investment in order to tear down some of these defenses. And so I think because it only takes a time investment to put them up and it doesn't cost resources, we need something similar to be able to tear them down. So I think that's the only thing that's kind of missing from this. But otherwise, I'd say these defenses changes are welcome. I do think that since they reduced the amount of time that they took to construct since the big patch where they changed the ability to capture and construct at the same time, I did feel like they decreased the construction time a bit too much. And so this is welcome. Now on to U.S. forces. I think U.S. forces probably ended up with the most changes. And unsurprisingly, it seems like, from what I'm hearing from a lot of players, they're the least noticeable, which is honestly probably a good thing for the most part. And I'll explain why as we get into the different changes and some of the different strategies that were encouraged as a result of how it was prior to these changes. But let's summarize with this. We'll start with, so the U.S. Forces Weapons Support Center has been the go-to tech choice and has been dominant in high-level 1v1s. No surprise there if you've been watching my games. We've been seeing a lot of Weapons Support Center, pretty much only Weapons Support Center at the highest level in 1v1. We have reduced some power on key enablers such as the Bazooka team, Scouts, and M3 half-tracks. We are acutely aware that the barracks tech choice has been languishing despite the changes given to bars from Update 2.1 and have attacked this problem by going after some of the Axis counters, but we intend to make deeper changes in the future Update 2.2. So that's great news. They're acknowledging that the barracks is weak at the moment. The barracks needs some changes. It was very common at the highest levels for US players to linger in the weapon support center tech level and stall for tier 4, and it was just impossible to do that with barracks tech unless you were playing something like airborne. So they're reducing some of the power in the weapon support center, and it sounds like they have some bigger changes planned for the barracks later on, which I'm excited about. I think Riflemen have been in a rough place for a very long time, and so I will be welcoming any changes that those guys get. And I'll talk a little bit more about like what I think they need at the end of the video. For now, we're just going to go through the changes. So starting with the Scout Squad. So Scouts were too efficient in combat due to their veterancy, which allowed them to reach veterancy rank 1 in the early game before the first encounter. We're increasing the time it takes them to gain veterancy by 1 additional capture and reducing their first combat bonus. So veterancy requirements increase from 500, 1500, 3000 to 600, 1800, 3600. Vet 1 received accuracy bonus from 15% to 10%, and cost increased from 150 to 160. This is a welcome change. If you're playing team games, you're probably like, what's the big deal? What's the point? Who cares? Like, it sounds pretty inconsequential. In 1v1s, and especially at a high level, players had discovered that the combat power of Scouts was actually quite good due to this received accuracy bonus that they were getting at Vet 1. Most line units in the game get a received accuracy bonus of 10% at Vet 1. And for some reason, Scouts were getting a 15% bonus, making them that much harder to hit and to kill. That meant that basically you could flood the map with Scouts, get Vet 1 very quickly on all of those units, and get these crazy combat bonuses that allowed them to fight against line units, fight against pretty much everything, while having a really, really strong early map presence, and then snowballing that into a very early M3 half-track, which allowed them to pretty much completely dominate the field. Going into the mid-game, we were seeing a lot of people transition into artillery observers because they were a bit cheaper. And they also provide some really nice combat accuracy bonuses at Vet 2 that I think were way, way too high, but we'll talk about those in a second. So this is some welcome changes on the Scout Squad. I think for the most part in team games, it really won't be noticeable because you don't have players spamming Scouts in this way. But very welcome on the 1v1 side, and I think it's going to make a huge difference in the ability for, especially Wehrmacht in the early game, to counter scout-heavy strategies. Moving on to the artillery observers, so similar to the Scout Squad, artillery observers are too efficient, similar to pre-nerf Pathfinders. We're standardizing their cost to match the price increases Pathfinders have received. Furthermore, we are reducing the veterancy bonuses of both Pathfinders and artillery observers to make them less effective in overall combat against other infantry, as they are primarily combat support units, not standard infantry or advanced infantry replacements. Manpower upkeep increased from 1 to 1.5 per population, population increased from 5 to 6, and reinforced costs increased to match Pathfinders at 32. So this heavy artillery observer squad strategy was very popular in high-level 1v1s, especially when complemented with infantry assault ability for the advanced infantry battle group. Again, it allowed you to pretty much flood the map, and you're able to contest and engage like quite well with the artillery observer squads because they're cheap, they have great line of sight, and at Vet 1 and Vet 2, they were getting some excellent combat bonuses. And they've scaled both of those back. So I'll move on to the next part, which is Pathfinder and Artillery Observer veterancy. So Vet 1 received accuracy bonus reduced from 15% to 10%, and Vet 2 accuracy bonus reduced from 30% to 25%. You can see they were getting some major buffs to combat in the early game when they were getting Vet 1 and Vet 2, which were particularly easy for these units to get access to because of the XP bonuses they get for capturing territory. Now, like, basically, Grenadiers, Panzer Grenadiers, like, a lot of units were struggling against these Pathfinders once they got into the Vet 2 level. combined with the combat power, the utility, the vision they provided, the map presence, they were just way too efficient for their cost. And so they've scaled back some of the combat bonuses, I think, appropriately, to make the Axis more capable at fighting these units, because like they said in the notes above, they're not supposed to be combat replacement units. They're not supposed to be line unit replacements or standard infantry replacements. They're supposed to be combat support, and they were not filling that role in the small game modes. And I know I was seeing some of it in higher levels, but it was mostly in the smaller game settings, 1s and 2s. Riflemen. So it sounds like there's some bigger changes planned for Riflemen, but they did do us a bit of a favor by reducing some of their veterancy requirements. So they reduced the veterancy requirements from 950, 2850, 5700 to 900, 2700, and 5400. So basically what this means is they're reducing the time it takes for the Riflemen to vet up. And this was a major issue for them. I don't think this is completely fixed. It's a step in the right direction, but I still feel like the veterancy scaling of Riflemen takes too long for their cost and their performance. I would really like to see them perform better as they scale into the late game, but at the moment, it's very difficult to get there without the use of something like the captain. I would really like to see the captain maybe have his support veterancy removed and the Rifleman squad veterancy requirements either reduce further, or, I mean, I'll talk about this later at the end of the video. There's other options to make Riflemen good, but they're still not in a great place. This helps, but it's not enough for sure. Moving on to the quarter-ton truck. So veterancy requirements for this unit have been fixed. Previously, they were much higher than intended and did not follow the standard formula of X2, X3 for levels 2 and 3. So they changed the vet requirements and corrected them from 600, 2400, 4800 to 600, 1800, 3600. This is a great change. I almost never saw a vet 3 4x4. And in the first couple games that I played, I managed to get it, which was great. Combination of support veterancy, strong early game usage, etc. And it becomes a really nice unit at Vet 3. It's really great at dodging AT gun rounds, providing good recon. And then if you go for the weapon support option, or I think it's weapon support platform it's called, it gives the advanced repair and the ability to drop team weapons like mortars and machine guns. So it's very nice unit, and I think it's the core part of what makes the barracks even remotely competitive right now. Bazooka teams. So this is a big one. So bazooka teams have been overperforming, both highly effective against light vehicles early game and having strong scaling with powerful veterancy bonuses. This allowed US forces to reliably sit on basic tech and still effectively counter higher tier units. We're increasing their vet requirements, slowing down their scaling, and significantly increasing steady fire's delay before it activates. Bazooka teams will now need to position themselves more carefully to get the same effective power as before. This is a very welcome change. So they increased the vet requirements from 800, 2400, 48 to 1000, 3000, 6000. And as for the steady fire setup time, they increased it from 3.5 seconds to 7 seconds. So, in plain terms, what this basically means is prior to this adjustment, the steady fire setup time, what you were able to do was attack a vehicle with a bazooka squad. And once the first volley was fired, if you issued a stop command, then the bazooka squad was able to reload their bazookas and fire another volley at the same vehicle before that vehicle could escape by reversing away. And it created this really toxic dynamic. I actually have a game. I might upload it and share a link to it just to kind of showcase how bad this was, especially in high level games. It just became incredibly easy and really trivialized pretty much all vehicle usage if you had enough bazooka squads. So now you have to pay more attention and be more decisive about how you're going to use your bazookas. Are you going to use them aggressively or are you going to use them defensively? And if you use them defensively, you should be able to position near machine gun teams, position near light vehicles to support them, and pick a static position to get this steady fire bonus, which I think was the originally intended design. So they've basically corrected the toxic behavior that was incentivized with bazooka teams and made it so you have to be more intentional about getting the value out of this bonus, which I think is a great change. So well done here with the bazooka team. M3 Armored Personnel Carrier and Medical variant. The stock M3 could be too difficult to contend with in the early game thanks to its fast timing and durability against early game infantry small arms. Allowing players to move it point blank into standard infantry engagements. To make the stock M3 less effective in the shock roll, we are reducing its health and armor. So they're reducing the health from 320 to 300. Frontal armor reduced from 10 to 7.5. They also did the same armor reduction, but not health, on the assault carrier. This is a great change because, again, especially at high level, the M3 was coming out super early and was like kind of a soft counter to pretty much any other light vehicle that could come out at the time. Like a basic 250 it fared well against. The 221 it could bully pretty effectively. And as stated here, it would really just be able to just drive on top of pretty much any infantry squad, and with taking pretty negligible damage could harass them really well with the top mounted turret. And so now, like, players are going to have to be more considerate about doing this because the reduction in armor means that small arms are going to penetrate it more easily, and the reduction in health is going to mean that it's threatened by snares more effectively as well. So basically what they're doing is they're opening the window for infantry to counterplay against this super early M3 by penetrating it with small arms and then hitting it with a snare. Whereas before, it was much more difficult to be able to do that. So very welcome change, very helpful, especially in the high level space. So as for the M3 75mm gun motor carriage, so the 75mm is receiving adjustments to make the unit less effective against heavier vehicles at long range. Currently, the unit allows the player, when combined with the bazooka team, to remain in weapon support center for most of their anti-tank options thanks to the unit's price and lack of additional tech requirements. We have also increased the upgrade cost to make it less efficient to convert multiple half-tracks. So, penetration reduced from 200 160 to 140. 200 160 140 to 200 150 120. So put simply, what this means is basically the M3, the GMC especially, was pretty consistently able to penetrate everything at the Panzer IV level and below on every single shot in terms of penetrating the frontal armor. And this was really rough for Axis to deal with, especially players using P4s, because the GMC is also faster and has more range. So you could really effectively like kite the medium tank options for Axis. And like they said in the notes, like it basically allowed you to get all of your anti-tank solutions from your tier 1.5 building as US that would scale throughout the entire game, which I think is a bit of a problem. Like you need to be incentivized to tech up and get into those later tier units like the Hellcats, M1AT guns, and some of the other options that come later on. And there was just no need for that based on how strong the weapon support center options were between the bazooka squad and the gun motor carriage. So now effectively what this means is the penetration rate on tanks like the P4 and below will still remain above average, but we will get the occasional max range bounces. So the Panzer IV armor value is about 170. That's going to put it at like just over a 60% chance of penetrating at long range. However, against vehicles like the StuG D, which has 280 frontal armor, I believe it is, or the Brumbar, which has 300, you'll see a lot less penetration from max range on these units. And I think that's appropriate considering how late they come out and how slow they are and easy to punish for units like the GMC. So the unit's still going to be very useful. I also think the time upgrade and the cost change was also suitable considering the power of these weapons. But I think we're going to see now, like, the GMC is still going to be a really effective option for light vehicle counters, but as the players progress into the late game, the US player is going to be incentivized to go for heavier anti-tank options to deal with some of the heavier Axis tanks, which makes sense, right? They shouldn't be able to sit in tier 1.5 for all of their solutions for the entire game. So very welcome change on the GMC. Well done here. Mortar pit, armor reduced from 5 to 3. Basically what this is they wanted to increase the capability of small arms to tear down these pits. We were seeing like the half tracks that have the ability to plant the free, what is it called, fighting position. They were basically able to like litter them all over the map for free, and they were very difficult to tear down because you'd usually have to use an anti-tank weapon or like a vehicle of some kind, and they took a long time. Now with the armor reduction, you can counter these with small arms if you catch them in a poor position, which I think makes a lot more sense. Like if you have an assault unit approaching a mortar position, they should be able to tear it down, right? So this is a welcome change. Paratroopers. So paratroopers, they wanted to improve the paratrooper unit's performance as it scales. To do this, experience requirements are lowered, and we're improving their bonus veterancy to increase their offensive potential. So vet requirements reduced from 1,200, 3,600, 7,200 to 1,000, 3,000, 6,000. The Vet 2 rate of fire bonus was increased from 15 to 20%, and the Vet 2 rate of fire bonus now properly affects all attack speed stats. So I'm not going to explain this in too much detail. If you want to know like what is happening here, you can go to the fireside chat where Jason explains how attack speed stats were working across the game. Put simply, it basically meant that like attack speed was sometimes built into different unit stats, like actual weapon fire rate versus fire rate cooldown versus reload rate. All of those were different across many different units, and they kind of consolidated them all into one. So now like we should see a lot more consistency in these rate of fire bonuses for all units that have them. So welcome change. Now I do think paratroopers are actually in a pretty good spot prior to the patch. Recognizing they weren't like the most popular because there were other strategies that were just more consistently performing, but I did feel like paratroopers they're in a pretty good spot because they have a nice long range DPS profile with the 1919s. They're very healthy. They're a very beefy unit, and that's further amplified by their Vet 1 bonus. I believe it's like capture and control or something like that. Season hold, I think it's called. It gives them a damage reduction bonus while they're near a capture point. So I thought paratroopers were actually in a pretty good spot, and I think this is just going to make them even stronger, which I think will be cool to see and cool to experiment with. And frankly, I think it feels like it's going to give me something a bit more to chew on until we see some of the tier 1 buffs coming into the next update. So I'm happy about this change. I don't think it's like too egregious or anything. I think paratroopers will still be counterable. They'll still be, it'll still be possible to fight them, but they are going to be much better now with these changes. Supply drops. So the supply drops for US forces are having their scatter increase to reduce how often crates stack on each other. So if you know anything about the supply drops, you've been using these abilities, you'll notice that sometimes it can be frustrating to try to access the item that you want from the supply drop because they get stuck on top of each other. For example, like the air resupply operation for special operations, a lot of players would just want the fuel, or they wouldn't want like some parts of it, but they'd want other parts. Like maybe they'd want the AT gun, but not the machine gun. Sometimes it was difficult to crew or to right click on the proper item because of how stacked on top of each other they were. So they basically spread them out so that when they land on the ground, they should be much more consistently landing further apart so that it's easier to access the item that you're looking for. So this is a welcome change and very nice. Happy to see it. War Machine. Command point cost increased from 3 to 4. This is a welcome change as well. I think War Machine was too easy to get access to on early game vehicles, especially in the motor pool. I think motor pool has different problems, especially in team games. I know a lot of players are complaining about the viability of motor pool at the moment in team games. In 1v1s, it's pretty good, but War Machine made it quite strong because of the manpower economy. So requiring a little bit of extra CP investment is a welcome change. Resupply operation, costs reduced from 180 to 150 munitions, which I think is great. I think Spec Ops was already in quite a good spot, and you get a lot of great value out of this ability. So reducing the cost slightly is going to make it even more attractive as an option. The Whizbang. Okay, so Some interesting things happened to the Whizbang. Tightrope made a fantastic video overviewing the patch notes. I'll link that in the description. He talks about the Whizbang and showcases some of the changes as well. Basically, the Whizbang fires in a straight line now, no matter what. Regardless of whether it's firing over buildings or through world objects, it's always firing in a straight line. And it looks kind of silly because the rockets will just fly through whatever object is in their path to make their way to the target. And so I'm not a huge fan of this. I'm not a huge fan of this always firing in a low arc now. I do like that they increased the rocket speed. I think that is a welcome change. It was pretty easy to hear the Whizbang firing and reposition without taking a lot of meaningful damage. But now, like, we're going to see, I think, these are going to be pretty dominant. And because they fire in a low arc and the rocket speed has been increased, I think these might be a little bit too strong. I do think that, like, as a player, you should have to think about the positioning of your Whizbang, what objects are in the firing path. You know, is the turret going to have to raise, or is it going to be able to fire in a straight line? Those are things that you should have to think about as a player, as opposed to just getting consistent behavior 100% of the time. Part of what makes Co so interesting is the world elements and how they impact your ability to use your units in combat. And this kind of just takes that dynamic away for this artillery unit. So I would like to see this low arc firing thing probably reverted. And the rocket speed, I think, is fine. I also think the Whizbang probably needs the, what's it called? The long-range barrage needs to probably get the same treatment as the Stuka, where you're not able to use both barrages back to back, but by spending munitions on, say, the long-range barrage first, it sets your basic barrage on a much shorter cooldown. I think that would make a lot more sense. Similar to what they did to the Stuka, I think they need to do it to the Whizbang as well. On to the Wehrmacht. So, Wehrmacht is having some key dominant units and abilities reduced in power, while seeing underperforming units gain some improvements. Headquarters. The low cost of medical stations made mid-game transition for Wehrmacht far too sharp. This, along with other changes, intends to give allies more breathing room. Medical stations upgrade increased from 150 manpower in cost to 200 manpower. So I like this change. I probably would have gone for like a small fuel cost, even like 10 fuel. I think would have made a lot of sense, but I understand what they're trying to do here. So rather than increasing and creating a fuel costing for the Wehrmacht healing, they're basically making it so that you're not slowing down the capability to get to your first light vehicle or to get to your first officer quarters purchase. Instead, they're deciding to go with just increasing the manpower sink on the healing. And in that, you know, they're I guess basically incentivizing players to, or I guess incentivizing the asymmetry between the factions and the different healing options. So I think this is good. It did need a bit of a nerf, and like I said, I probably would have gone for a fuel cost, but I do understand why they did this. So good change. Kettenkrad reconnaissance vehicle build time reduced from 30 seconds to 20 seconds. This is really nice. The Ketten was not seeing a lot of usage, especially in high-level small games, because basically the tempo that you would sacrifice for the map control and the early game weakness of Wehrmacht was overwhelming. And so we were seeing a lot more like Pioneer build-based, Pioneer favored builds than the Ketten, because the Ketten was taking too long to have a significant impact on the map. So this 10-second build time reduction, it's allowing you to be a lot more aggressive with your capturing in the early game, and allows you to focus more of your unit on keeping your units consolidated, which is kind of what you have to do to survive the Wehrmacht early game. So this is a welcome change for the Ketten. I like it. Grenadiers. Grenadiers continue to struggle to earn veterancy due to their low lethality. Their veterancy requirements are being reduced slightly to make their scaling easier. This is a fine change. I think Grenadiers have like a bit of a different problem with kind of associated with their cost and then like their cost effectiveness, depending on what you choose to invest into them. Grenadiers are actually like decent line units against USF, and Riflemen base builds, but against infantry sections and UK, they're pretty trash. It's really, really tough trying to use Grenadiers against UK, unless you get like a significant numbers advantage. And I think like this will help with that a little bit, but I don't know if it addresses the problem directly. So interested to see what other changes they're going to make to Wehrmacht Tier 1 in the future, outside of, you know, the Grenadier unit itself. I think there's other options that could make it much more viable. As for the 221 armored car, so recent changes to the Panzerbuchse for the 221 made it too effective against units like the Humber, destroying it in 2 shots with high accuracy. The change increases the number of shots to kill certain vehicles by 1, while still retaining the unit's high accuracy and mobility. The radio antenna is also having its costs increased to better reflect its increased accessibility. So radio antenna increased from 35 to 50 munitions, Panzerbuchse damage decreased from 120 to 110, and blinding shot damage reduced from 120 to 80 damage. So this is a very welcome change. The 221 was an absolute menace in small games, especially 1v1s and 2v2s. Most players were pretty much trying to avoid going for a light vehicle altogether because of how easy it was to counter them with the 221. It was fast, you know, it's faster than the Humber, so it was very easy to chase down and destroy. Even against the Greyhound, because of the mobility of the 221, it was a very effective deterrent and potential hunter for something like the Greyhound. So reducing the damage and keeping the other strengths of the unit, I think, are a good thing. And y'all just have to be more thoughtful about when you choose to chase with the 221 versus maybe playing a little bit more defensively or like behind, you know, your line units. So this is a welcome change. I've played a little bit with it, and it still feels strong against the light vehicles, but it's not just like an absolute terror or menace like it was in the previous patch. So very welcome change. Happy to see this. Marder 3M. So this is the Wehrmacht variant. They reduced the experience requirements from 1500, 4500, 9K to 1300, 3900, 7800. I almost never saw a Vet 3 Marder, so I think this is a welcome change. Moving on to the Wirbelwind. So the following change to make the Wirbelwind more vulnerable to light cannon fire from allied light vehicles. Frontal armor decreased from 100 to 90. It was very frustrating to get some bounces on these from something like a Crusader 2 or a 2-pounder occasionally, for the tier vehicle that it is and how mobile and lethal it is. I did feel like an armor change was a good move. I do feel like there's other things that need to be done to the Wirbel, and power needs to be moved around a little bit within the Wehrmacht tier 2, but I'll talk about that probably at the end of the video. Moving on to Stormtrooper, or the Stormtrooper squad. So, Stormtroopers were too durable when under the effects of Shock Assault, an ability that denies suppression and increases offensive potential. So previously, Shock Assault was providing a received accuracy bonus from 20%, and they reduced it to 5%. So basically, Shock Assault, the Stormtroopers using Shock Assault are going to be easier to hit for all small arms. This is a very welcome change. It was very easy to just like straight up walk at anything, whether it was in cover, whether it was a machine gun or what have you. Shock Assault was just like basically just the win button for Stormtroopers no matter where they were when fighting against infantry. And now it's like, if you're standing in the open, you're still going to take a decent amount of damage from the incumbent small arms, from the machine gun that you're charging into. So you're going to have to be a little bit more thoughtful about positioning when you use this. So very welcome change. Very happy to see it for the Stormtroopers. The Panzer IV. I'm excited about this one. So the Panzer IV has difficulties dealing with armored targets despite being the only anti-armor option in the Panzer Company, and when combined with other factors such as its average speed, mobility, and accuracy, it can be unreliable at engaging medium armored vehicles, particularly at a distance. To increase reliability against enemy vehicles, the unit's medium to long penetration is being increased. So they're increasing it from 220, 140, 125 to 220, 170, 140. So what this basically means is like the Panzer IV, as you guys probably know, struggled to penetrate units like the Grant, the Sherman, and other vehicles at medium and long range, which is where the P4 is engaging vehicles most of the time because it's not particularly fast and can't chase enemy vehicles super well. So this penetration increase is still going to keep the dynamic between those vehicles mostly the same, where like the Sherman is probably still going to slightly outtrade the Panzer IV in terms of armor to armor capabilities. But the likelihood of penetrating at max range is much better. So we were seeing like I was seeing pretty 50-50 ratios between penetrating and not penetrating against vehicles that by no means have like heavy armor, like the unupgraded Sherman, the Grant, things that you would kind of expect the Panzer IV to be able to penetrate. It was failing to a lot of the time, and this basically fixed that. It's much more consistent at trading with tanks at long range, so I think it's going to be a much more viable option, especially in team games, which I'm really, really excited about, because I always wanted to use the Panzer IV, but they always felt really bad to use, especially against armor. And now I think they'll be much better. Fallschirmjager. So Vet 2 rate of fire bonus now properly affects all attack speed stats. Basically, how you can think about this is a slight buff to the Fallschirmjager's offensive capabilities at Vet 2. Not much more to say about that. Again, if you want the long-winded explanation, you can go and listen to the fireside chat with Jason, which I'll probably link in the description. Fallschirmjagers. Fallschirmjagers were too costly for their performance. While they could be potent when attacking from an ambush, their high cost made it difficult to justify the expense for a small squad. To address the issue, we're slightly adjusting their deployment and reinforce costs, and will now allow this unit to scale faster through veterancy. I'm thrilled about this change. I always thought that Fallschirmjagers were were too expensive for their performance. Now with them being made much more accessible and reducing the veterancy requirements, helping them to scale more quickly, I think these guys will actually be pretty viable. The thing that a lot of people get wrong about the Fallschirmjagers is that they stay in committed engagements against allied units that have high health or superior numbers. They stay in those engagements for far too long. How you want to be using the Fallschirmjagers is triggering the ambush bonus at a favorable range or favorable position. And then if your opponent is like committing to the engagement, you probably just want to back off. Now that could be a soft retreat to allow you to get the out of combat healing bonus that they get at Vet 1, or it could be like a hard retreat and just allowing you to slowly bleed them and come back onto the map stronger. These guys, once they hit Vet 2 and 3, have some pretty incredible combat scaling. And they get like crazy lethality bonuses. Not to mention the ability to fire a Panzerfaust with the ambush bonus from cover is also a very nice way to protect your units in the early game from light vehicles. So I think we're going to see a lot more Fallschirmjagers. I'm going to be using them a lot more. I actually had a game from yesterday I may throw up on YouTube to kind of share how I was using this battle group. But they feel really nice. I'm really happy about this change, so well done on that. StuG Assault Group. So my initial feelings about this change, so they increased the manpower cost from 650 to 660. So they increased the cost by 10, which is pretty hilarious. But when you think about what's going to follow, so this, I'll actually read this change first and then we'll come back to it. So the StuG D, it affects the Africa Corps variant as well. The StuG D was too effective due to how quickly it could fire and its veterancy bonus reducing the impact of flanks. We are slowing down its firing rate and making its veterancy bonus only affect its frontal armor. So the Vet 2 armor bonus now only affects the frontal armor. The reload speed has been reduced from 3.5/4 seconds to 4.5/5 seconds. So slight reduction in the DPS and the reload rate, or increase in the reload rate. And now the Vet 2 armor bonus only applying to the frontal armor is going to make it much easier to penetrate the flanks, especially once this unit gets to Vet 2, which was very difficult on the previous patch. Like basically once a StuG got to Vet 2, it was pretty difficult to penetrate at all, let alone with like mid-game units, which is around the time that it comes out. So very welcome change. Now circling back to the assault group, when I take into consideration the changes to that they just made to the StuG D that are nerfs, as well as the Stormtrooper nerfs, I don't think that this is going to be as strong, but I still think it's very good. So I think like in the future, I would still like to see something like a CP increase, or maybe tying this call into tech, which I have other feelings about. I'll talk about at the end of the video. But for now, this is like a welcome set of changes that's going to reduce the power of this call-in. So happy about that. Breakthrough. The following change is meant to reduce the impact of breakthrough, which allows players to take and quickly retake large amount of territory at low cost. So they're reducing the duration to 45 seconds from 60. I always thought this ability was way too long and way too cheap. So they've addressed both things here. Whether or not it's enough of a change, I think it's still a bit too early to tell, but a welcome touch, I would say. Mechanized assault group. So this is the end of the battle group tree on the breakthrough side that comes with the 251 and the Stormtrooper. Basically what they did was they increased the cost from 520 manpower and 20 fuel to 600 manpower and 30 fuel. Basically what you're doing now is you're paying full price for both of those units combined, being the 251 half-track and the Stormtrooper. To me, this makes a lot of sense. It makes it a lot less cost-effective to use the call-in capability. And for that reason, I'm happy about it. I still think it will be strong. I still think people will pick it. But, you know, you'll have to pay the actual cost for the units, which I think is good. Now, moving on to UK forces. I think they got the least changes. Maybe not. I'm not sure. Maybe it was DAC. I can't remember. But moving on to UK forces. So basically, they said in summary, we're addressing the wide disparity in effectiveness between 1v1s and team games for Canadian Shock Battle Group. Some additional changes that were made to smooth out the early game. Starting with the Dingo. The Dingo is having its early game vision reduced to make aggressive action riskier, preventing it from easily seeing enemy positions before it engages. It will regain the vision bonuses as it reaches veterancy. So they reduced the vision from 50 to 40, which is effectively the engagement range for the Dingo. This is how far it can fire. Vet 2 now also grants +5 vision to increase, in addition to existing bonuses, and Vet 3 vision and detection bonus increased from 5 to 10. So they basically moved the vision of the Dingo into its veterancy now. I have some thoughts about this. So I don't think the strength of the Dingo had anything to do with its ability to recon positions. I mean, that contributed to it slightly. I think it has way more to do with its accuracy and its combat power, specifically against infantry. The Dingo, you can pretty safely just poke away at infantry squads from max range and deal very consistent damage while taking very little punishment in return. From my perspective, this unit is a no-brainer build in team games because of how much map presence it allows you to have and strong early game economy because of the combination of the access to medical kits, the artillery, as well as all of the damage that it ends up taking and is simply just repaired by your starting sapper. What I think needed to be done to this unit is have its long-range accuracy dramatically reduced so that in order to get real combat power out of it, you would need to close the gap and get like in the face of your opponent, which creates a risk element, right? Instead of just being able to safely poke away from max range, putting you into a range where you have to accept that you could be snared or that you could be pursued by an infantry squad would make the dynamic between the Dingo and other units much more interesting. From my perspective, I think this unit is meant to be the early game soft counter to like the 250, as well as like the recon capabilities, because prior to getting a recce section, UK doesn't really have any other super early game recon options. So if it were up to me, I probably would have touched the long range accuracy of this unit to make it so that you have to be in your opponent's face to get the real combat benefits, and probably left the vision the same as it was. But this is what they decided to go for. It's a nerf. It was needed. There are nerfs needed. I don't think this fixes the problem. So hopefully we'll see more changes to this unit in the next patch as well. They're reducing the build time on the Vickers from 30 to 25 seconds, I think to help incentivize some early game builds, including the Vickers, and get it on the map a little bit earlier. A welcome change. I think not much more to say about it here. Bishop. So we are giving back some of the bishop's firepower that it lost in the previous patch, as the health change has made this unit considerably more vulnerable to counter battery and direct assaults. Combined with its slower rate of fire, it made the unit ineffective in its role as artillery. So they decreased the weapon reload speed and made it consistently 3.75 seconds. And they reduced the barrage recharge from 50 to 45 seconds. Pretty negligible changes, not like the most noticeable from my perspective. I mean, I always say to people, when you're going bishops, you need at least 2. And after your second one, you need to go for light vehicle training to get the bonuses to recharge, vehicle ability recharge speed, and rate of fire. Both of those favor and help the bishop quite a bit. I know these guys, like, they're still in a pretty rough spot because they can be counter batteried quite easily. I think they could do with like a slight bump to their health. Even like 200 health or like 180 health would be better than 160, because there's a good chunk of artillery units that can just one-shot them. Maybe that's by design, like maybe that's fine. But personally, I think it might be a little bit too punishing considering some of the changes they made to the mortar half-track later on, which we'll talk about also. But I think, yeah, some power needed to be added back into the bishop. Most people were using the field howitzers and like the emplacements, which I was really happy to see. But I do think that these guys could use a little bit more help to make them more attractive and less risky to go for. Canadian Shock Battle Group. We're making changes to how the pulse effect works from the Canadian Shock Battle Group. While potent in 1 vs 1, the battle group is weak in team games, unable to provide any benefits to allies, lacks the direct firepower and powerful off-maps of other battle groups, and point captures are more difficult to achieve. So, the following abilities now apply to teammates: Attacking Spirit, Offensive Resupply, Churchill, Crocodile, Tip of the Spear, and Point Assault. So, I understand what they were trying to do here. They were trying to make it so that like the bonuses stacking on your teammates makes this a more viable choice. However, I'm pretty sure that this is bugged and not being used as it's intended. It's not set up as it's intended, because at the moment, any teammate decapturing any point anywhere on the map triggers this bonus, regardless of whether the player that selected the Canadian battle group and one of these abilities is present or not. So in other words, I think the intended design is that where the Canadian player is decapturing territory, the surrounding allied infantry should get those bonuses, which makes a lot of sense to me. But how it's working right now is if you're the Canadian player, you're playing on the north side of the map in a 4v4, and your teammate on the south side of the map decaptures a point, they get the bonus too. And to me, that doesn't make any sense. I don't really know why they did that. I don't know if it's as intended. To me, it seems like it's probably not intended, but that's how it's currently working. So this is very strong right now. Both of these are. Attacking Spirit and Offensive Resupply triggering on like Rangers, for example. Rangers can like decapture a point and then drop a whole bunch of weapons because they only cost 55 munitions because of the bonus. It's kind of crazy. So I think once this is fixed, then maybe it will be fine and fair. But for now, I think this is too strong. Moving on to Attacking Spirit. So reduce the total healing from 70 to 55. They're reducing how effective it is because in smaller game modes, the ability to skip field infirmary and continue applying pressure to the enemy could be overwhelming when combined with the effectiveness of the British infantry. So they reduced the healing by 15. I don't think this fixes the problem with Attacking Spirit. I think the main problem is the ability to heal in combat, which changes all of the time to kill breakpoints for units, which I think is probably the biggest problem when it comes to this ability. In my opinion, what this needs to be changed to is a ability that heals your infantry much more quickly, but is instantly broken. The heal is like shut down when they engage in combat. That way there's clear counterplay for the opponent. Just starting a quick engagement to turn off the healing or even delay it would make a lot more sense than the current iteration. I just think healing in combat is super toxic and probably needs to go away. So yeah, not a fan of this. Good, like, you know, good adjustment, but not what I think needed to be done to this ability. Canadian shock section, man, I'm jazzed about these changes. I'm so excited. So let's go into this. So we're lowering the ready aim time of Piats as they took too long to acquire targets. While these weapons will not immediately fire at targets that have entered the threat range, it will make it harder to back away from the Piat squad without taking some damage if the enemy overextends. The range of the mortar is also being increased to allow this upgrade to help it compete against the Piat upgrade. The scatter is still high enough to ensure that some mortar bombs will miss and does not guarantee a wipe on a team weapon squad at longer ranges. So, mortar barrage increased, range increased from 45 to 52.5, and then the Piat ready aim time reduced from 1.75 to 2 seconds to 1.5 to 1.75 seconds. Basically what this means in simple terms is that the mortar will be able to be fired from a much longer distance, which will make it safer to use against like machine guns and other units of that nature. And then the Piat will be much more responsive, not much more, it will be slightly more responsive at firing at enemy vehicles that come into range. At the moment, it's like, I mean, prior to this patch, it was pretty much too difficult to get them to fire at all at any vehicles if your opponent was quick to react and move out of firing range. But this should shorten that window, that safe window for your opponent to escape before taking damage from the Piat. I don't know if this change was enough, but it's in the right direction, so I'm happy about that. Incendiary munitions, they increase the command point cost from 1 to 2 because of its high power. It makes perfect sense to me. Pyrotechnics, massively overperforming due to a bug that allowed multiple stacks of the debuff to apply to the same unit for a brief period. We're also fixing a tooltip area that oversold the intended effect. Overall, players should expect a much lower effect on enemy units when using pyrotechnics. So, they fixed the accuracy tooltip to properly state it reduces accuracy by 20%. This is good to know because the tooltip on the battle group says 33%, but if you actually mouse over the ability when it's on one of the units that gets the benefit, it says 20%. So they just fixed it and made it uniform across everything. And then they reduced the speed debuff slightly from 25% to 20%. So a quick note about this. Pyrotechnics, it says that there was a bug that allowed multiple stacks of the debuff to apply to the same unit for a brief period. This makes a lot of sense and explains a lot. However, I don't think they actually fixed this. I'll link again to in the description to Tightrope's video where he showcases it on the Churchill Crocodile. It still looks like it's stacking multiple times to me on units that get this bonus. So like maybe a hotfix will help this later on. I'm not sure. But for now, it's not actually fixed. So still overperforming from my perspective, still very strong. Finally, onto the DAC. So, starting with the Mechanized Company. The Mechanized Company is having its fuel costs reduced to be a more attractive option against support elements and allows unit like the 8-Rad to hit the field sooner. I like this a lot because the Flak Fearling was still pretty clearly the winning choice for me in terms of the choice between the 8-Rad and the Flak Fearling. But now, with the reduction in fuel costs of the Mech Company, we'll see some of those tier 2 units as options coming out a little bit sooner. Not a huge change, but just a touch. And I think this will mean a little bit more usage of tier 2 for players. So happy about this change. Veteran squad leaders. Oh my gosh, dude. It's about time. I have to say, when they made this change way back in like whatever it was, 1.9 or 1.8 or something, I could see right away that it was way too much of an over-rotation in cost. So let me remind everybody, the way veteran squad leaders used to work is you would pay 200 manpower for the upgrade, and basically all of your infantry units on the field would get the bonus. And for Panzer Grenadiers specifically, it meant that they would get a free model added into the squad. So it was very cost effective. Because if you had 3 PGs on the field, you pay 200 manpower, you get 3 extra models, and you get the veterancy bonuses, the extra, the extra DPS from having the extra man. It was very, very cost effective. Then they changed it so that it costs 250 instead of 200, and you had to pay for the extra model on the Panzer Grenadier squads. So if you had 3 PGs, it effectively went from a 200 manpower upgrade to 350 because you had to pay 250 plus 32, I think it is, manpower for each model, which effectively rounds out to be about 350 manpower, which is way too much. So I'm happy about this cost reduction. However, I do think that like the way it benefits some of the other DAC infantry is a little bit odd. I think what would make a lot more sense is having some consistency in terms of like maybe it should just add an extra man to all DAC infantry units and then be made more expensive or something like that. I don't know. But from my perspective, I think especially players that like don't read the tooltips in really deep detail, they don't actually know what this does. It's not super obvious. So I don't know, maybe some future adjustments for this ability, but for now, this is a welcome change because it was way overpriced for when you get access to it. Assault Grenadier Squad. Assault Grenadiers were far too oppressive in the early game, having both the duration to make a full charge, but also retaining the bonus long enough to consistently win over superior numbers. So they changed the assault disembark duration from 15 seconds to 10 seconds. This was a nice touch. I do think... Oh, sorry about that. I do think that fact that it has no cooldown is a big part of what made it so strong. But from what I've seen in my games in the last couple of days since the patch, this strategy is still strong, but not overperforming the way that it was. Because you could effectively get your assault grens out at max distance, max engagement distance from a 250 or whatever, and they could run and chase down pretty much anything, especially like team weapons or AT guns specifically. It was very easy to just like full send onto an AT gun unless you got suppressed by something. It also, like, having really, really late access in the ability to the assault grenades made a huge difference. So now, like, players will have to be more intentional about getting the value out of this ability instead of just being able to use it in pretty much every circumstance on no cooldown. The 10-second bonus is not enough for them to accomplish some of the things that they were last patch. So happy about this change. 250 Mortar half-track. So the Mortar half-track was too durable to enemy fire when caught out of position. We're significantly reducing its base health to make the unit vulnerable to enemy fire even with upgrades. So now the health is going from 280 to 120. With upgrades, this would take, what is this, I think it's an extra 160 health that they get. No, 120, sorry. So it was taking it to 500 HP, which made it almost impossible to kill these things with counter battery. And they're also very fast, so they were difficult to chase down and kill. Now, without upgrades, they'll be much more susceptible to fire. You'll be able to kill them in like a single snare with no upgrades. But with the upgrades, they'll get up to 240 HP, which still means that like it's possible to counter battery them and kill them that way. And I think that was the effort behind this change. So very happy to see this adjustment. And I think it's going to have big impact mostly for team games where these things are pretty easy to get and easy to protect as well. The Marder is having its fuel costs increase due to the reduction in cost of the mechanized company and its anti-tank efficiency when upgraded. I don't have a lot of thoughts about this, honestly. The veterancy changes are nice because, again, I almost never saw a Vet 3 Marder. But I still think these units have a lot of problems. It still feels like they're pretty difficult to use. They're very slow, very cumbersome to use. They are good when you get like a whole bunch of them, and especially with DAC when you get like the rapid advance upgrade, which gives them rotation rate and speed, then they feel much better to use. But prior to that, they're really clunky and cumbersome. And I don't know. I don't really feel like I don't love using these. I would much prefer an AT gun, or in my DAC games, I tend to go for the Flak 88 or the Flak 36, I should say. Because I have a much easier time towing it around and using it than using the Marder. So I don't know. I think more needs to be done for these, but in the meantime, like, this is a fine change. I don't really have any strong feelings about this. StuG D we already talked about. Again, veterancy 2 armor bonus only affecting frontal armor and the reload speed being increased slightly. This I think is a welcome change. This unit was very difficult to counter in some cases, especially for like UKF. Now it's going to be properly susceptible to flanking shots, as well as dealing a little bit less damage, but still maintaining its strong frontline presence and being a great way to dislodge enemies from cover positions. Tiger Heavy Tank. The Afrika Korps Tiger is too efficient and is seeing widespread play at all levels and modes. To address this, we're increasing the fuel cost of the Tiger to give the opponent more time to prepare and exploit the lack of opposing armor. They increased the fuel cost from 220 to 245. So I think that what this means is we're going to see a lot less of the Tiger in small games where the economy and map presence is much more important. DAC is also just generally weaker in 1v1s and 2v2s because the map size relative to how much of it you are working on is very different than in 4v4s. In 4v4s, DAC is super strong because you can pretty much keep all your units on screen at the same time and be an effective teammate. In ones, you can't do that. You have to spread out. And so in ones, like the much more of the map can be contested. It's much more manageable to like isolate DAC units and push them off. And I understand why they do this because the amount of like 17-minute, 18-minute Tigers that I was seeing in big team games was like, it was happening all the time. And I don't actually think that this addresses the problem. The problem is that DAC performs incredibly well without a lot of fuel investment or armor because of all of the stacking combined arms bonuses. And I think that is what needs to be addressed sooner than addressing the cost of the Tiger, so that like DAC is not able to perform at the level that they do without paying for some vehicles, you know? I mean, the Flak is still like an incredibly cost efficient unit as an example, as is like the StuG D. But like, I don't know if increasing the cost of the Tiger is going to fix the problem. I think we're just going to see now, like instead of 17, 18-minute Tigers, we're going to see 18, 19-minute Tigers. I'm glad they're not touching the power of the Tiger because I think it needs to be powerful, as, you know, it's like the latest tier option has, you know, and it's very expensive and we're seeing a lot of like medium spam. So I think like in terms of performance, the unit is completely fine. And I'm glad they're not touching that, but I don't actually think that this addresses the problem of why the Tiger is coming out so consistently in early on in these big team games, especially. Goliath, this is a nice quality of life change. So they now remain hidden for 4 seconds when leaving cover, which matches other camouflage units. And then the transfer depot, they're reducing the manpower cost from 200 to 150. This is probably an effort to get players to select that option over the plunder option. From my perspective, the plunder is just like almost way too cool to pass up. So I don't think it's going to change much for me, but I think like the transfer depot change is very nice. I mean, there's lots of like cost reduction for caches on the allies side. And now, you know, seeing that make its way over into this battle group, I think, again, a nice change. Finally, Bersaglieri. So the Bersaglieri speed allows the Afrika Korps to gain rapid map control and set the early pace of the game, allowing Bersaglieri to double up against a single squad before the opponent's second non-HQ unit can reinforce. To give the opponent more time to prepare, we're targeting the unit's initial speed, giving the opponent more time to bring up reinforcements and slow down how quickly Afrika Korps can seize the map. Passive sprint speed bonus reduced from 40% to 30%, and Vet 3 total speed unchanged. So basically, they're moving 10% of their passive sprint bonus into Vet 3, which I think is fine. But I don't think this fixes the problem with Bersaglieri. The problem with Bersaglieri is the fact that there is 0 CP call-in unit, so you can get them on the map immediately. Combined with any speed bonus, let alone 30%, it allows them to get way, way up on the map before any kind of opposition can be mounted, get into a strong defensive position. And because they have a long range DPS profile, it's so easy to kite allied infantry, especially riflemen. So Bersaglieri still feel terrible to play against, and I think they're way too forgiving as an infantry unit to use in any game setting, be it 1v1s or big team games. It's very easy to just get like a blob of these guys and move them around. And I want to talk about like a design specific problem that I think is exacerbated with Bersaglieri. So basically, like when Relic designed DAC, specifically Panzer Grenadiers, if you guys know about Panzer Grenadiers like damage profile, it's not like Grenadiers. It's Grenadiers has a very flat damage profile, meaning regardless of what range you're engaging at, Grenadiers will almost deal the same damage regardless. Panzer Grenadiers have the same damage arc as like Riflemen, which means they deal a lot more damage at close range and very little damage at long range. And that's by design. Relic did that intentionally because they recognized that with the combined arms mechanic, it would be so toxic for players to just kite with combined arms and be able to just burn down allied infantry at the absolute max range. So what they did was they gave Panzer Grenadiers a big slope on their damage profile to encourage players to play at the mid and short range with them, where they're going to get, you know, much more damage out of their bonuses, and you're not able to kite as effectively if you're using trying to use them at max range. Like, they're just not going to perform as good. So that was the design philosophy behind Panzer Grenadiers, and it makes perfect sense to me. It's very well thought out design. But then they made Bersaglieri. And Bersaglieri have the long range damage profile like Grenadiers do. They also have a very nice weapon upgrade, and they have two different speed abilities. They have the out of combat sprint and the active sprint that also makes them harder to hit. So all of that stuff that they did in thinking out Panzer Grenadiers for DAC, they basically threw out the window with Bersaglieri. And what I think they need to do is they need to move Bersaglieri into be more of like a mid-range or like an assault unit. Kind of like Assault Grenadiers, but different in that, you know, I don't know, maybe giving them access to the Breda a little bit earlier, but changing their DPS curve to be way less effective at long range, because the ability to just stand at max range and then kite and then like sprint out of combat to get some healing and rinse and repeat, it's so frustrating to play against and way too easy to execute for the player that are using these. So, long-winded explanation, they needed a nerf. This is a nerf, but I don't think it fixes the problem at all. So I hope to see more touches on the Bersaglieri in the future and some more clear identity for them. As for bug fixes, I mean, they said, you know, as previously noted, Canadian shock pyrotechnics no longer stacks the debuff numerous times. I don't think this is true. I think this is still broken. They also changed behavior of artillery radio beacon. Some people were calling this a bug, but it turns out it was by design. Well, it wasn't intended, but it was like, it wasn't broken, I guess. They just had to fix it. So now, put simply, what this means is basically what you could do with our artillery observers is, as long as you supervise the beacon, the barrage cooldown was fixed at 15 seconds. And what that meant was you could use the beacon and then you could walk away and fight an infantry squad for like 10 seconds. And then you could go back to the beacon and it would be almost refreshed instantly, because basically when the artillery observer would supervise the beacon, it would reset the cooldown to be fixed at 15 seconds. So if like 14 seconds had already passed, then you could use the beacon, go fight, come back, and instantly fire another barrage. Now what they're doing is they're making it so that the artillery observer supervise is going to influence the remaining ratio of cooldowns. So like, let's say it's been, I don't know, 15 seconds. And the squad comes back to supervise the beacon. Now it will just reduce the remaining cooldown. So like the ratio of the difference between 45 and 15. So that would be like 10 seconds. So now they'd have to stand at the beacon for 10 seconds instead of just 1 before resetting the cooldown. Kind of hard to explain, but I hope that made sense. Then they also fixed engineer units having 15 extra weapon range when Minesweeper's active. That's news to me. I had no idea that was the case. And then, oh yeah, fix the battle group paradrop ability audio playing at the start of the map, even if the abilities aren't unlocked. This was kind of funny result of the changes that they made. Then they made some small adjustments to Langres and Angleville. To me, the biggest, like, goofiest thing that they did not address in this was on Langres. On Langres, the VPs are smaller than normal VPs. And there's this really frustrating instance where if you right click on a VP with a squad with a low model count, oftentimes they'll just end up standing right outside the circle instead of actually going in and capturing it. So you have to individually micro them in. It's so annoying. So they really have to fix this. Honestly, if they can't fix it in the short term, I would just make it a bigger VP, make it a bigger capture area. But, a fix would be good too. Anyway, that's pretty much it, guys, for the notes. My overall impressions. Number one, I can see the influence of Dumais and Farighi throughout the patch notes, which I'm really excited about. I think overall, this is an excellent balanced patch. Everything that was really egregious in terms of strategies was touched or fixed from my perspective. And they increase the viability of a handful of other units, which will also increase the strategic diversity. All good things. All very, very good things. Some things that I think got missed in this patch. Obviously, USF Tier 1 needed more. I don't need to expand on that too much. I think Riflemen could probably use and I think this, honestly, I think this needs to happen with all of the quote-unquote mid to short-range infantry, but specifically the mid-range infantry. The way mid-range infantry work in this game, and I'm thinking specifically about Riflemen, I'm thinking specifically about Canadians, I'm thinking about Panzer Grenadiers for Wehrmacht, Panzer Grenadiers for DAC for that matter. The way they all work is like, they're all technically just better at short range. So most of the time, the most effective way to use them is to just run into your opponent. And from like a gameplay standpoint and from like what feels really authentically like Company of Heroes, it just feels trash. Like it negates the meaning of cover significantly. And you just, you kind of have these units that are just like crashing into each other, and it just doesn't look good or feel good from a gameplay standpoint. So what I think they need to do is they need to push out the mid-range profile of these units so that the DPS curve is much more flat when you go from short range to mid-range. So that, as good as they are at short range, they're only slightly worse at mid-range and really like dramatically worse at long range. This would actually encourage players to use cover more often and maybe get a little bit more value out of like the mid-range damage profile rather than just, wanting to just walk into your opponent anyways. There's way too many incentives to do that at the moment. So I think that's something like what Riflemen need. I also think some other like easy changes for them would be increasing the DPS of the bar. If you compare the bar to any other weapon upgrade, it's pretty much the worst. Especially in terms of like LMGs or like, whatever, assault rifles, whatever. Like the bar is the worst by far. And they're very expensive between the fuel cost and the munitions that you end up dumping into your Riflemen. Like they end up being a little bit too expensive. And so I think like that's probably another avenue that they could take to make Riflemen better. Again, I think also the veterancy could probably be adjusted. Maybe logistics doing a little bit more for veterancy. Right now, logistics only provides 50 XP for every model that's reinforced from the medical tent. It's hardly anything. Like, let's say you get like 10 models from a medical tent over the course of a whole game on one squad. That's only 500 XP. That's not even half. Well, it's like halfway to Vet 1, which is really like nothing. You look at things like infantry training or officer quarters, they're all providing like between 900 and 1,000 XP each. And we're talking about a 70 fuel upgrade that, yes, also provides a reduction in reinforcement costs, but doesn't really do much on the XP side. So I don't know, maybe a little bit could be done there as well. Other things that got missed, I think the Black Prince. The Black Prince I don't really see very often. And I think the reason why is because it's just too slow. And it makes it such a huge liability. There's so many heavy anti-tank weapons, loiters, abilities that it can be hit with. Right now it's slower than the Churchill, and I understand why from like a realism standpoint. Like, yeah, it's carrying a bigger gun, but I just don't think there's any reason for it to be as slow as it is. I think it could probably be brought up to the speed of the Churchill and still be a very effective, very counterable, big, heavy tank. So that is something I would like to see probably changed. Other things that got missed, I still think Jaegers for the tier 2 of Wehrmacht are too expensive. Panzer Grenadiers, from my perspective, they're definitely worth the 340 manpower that you pay for them. Jaegers, I don't feel like that. And what I'm seeing in a lot of my games is players will just instead go for more Grenadiers with officer quarters, because the DPS difference between Jaegers and Grenadiers is not that dramatic. It's like, it's different, but it's not that different. And so I think Jaegers, with the Panzerschreck nerf that they got, the removal of the ambush bonus, all of that stuff, I think their cost could probably be dropped back down to 320 manpower. And they would be much more attractive and much more frequently used, because I just don't find myself using them that often. I just find Grenadiers to be enough to do what I need them to do. And the incentive is not there to pay how much you need to pay for the Jaegers. Bugs not addressed. So we talked about pyrotechnics. The random Q bug. This is really hurting me. As somebody that's like playing at a pretty high level, my elo is very high. I want to just basically get into a game as fast as I can when I get on. And right now I can't do that, because if I queue random for more than one game mode at a time, like 1v1 or 2v2, if I do that, the queue just breaks. It just doesn't work. So I can only queue random for one game mode at a time, which I hate. So I think they really, really need to fix that, because, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm alone. Like, maybe it doesn't impact other people as much, but it's something that really bugs me, so I wanted to call that out. Last bug not addressed, the towing / attachment bug for heavy weapons. So sometimes like the 17 pounder, the Canone, the 88, they'll get stuck inside of the truck and you can't detach from it. This like completely breaks the purpose of those units and is really expensive. And so hopefully we'll see a fix for that in the near future as well. I talked about, so units not fixed. Bersaglieri I talked about in detail. Riflemen I talked about in detail. Dingo I talked about in detail. The Wehrmacht. So going back to the Wehrmacht, I actually think what they need to do with the Wehrmacht is this unit's lethality, especially like at close range and on the move, is absolutely ridiculous. Like, there isn't really anything that deals as much damage as this, except maybe the AA Crusader, which low-key I actually also think is overtuned. I think it's too good. And a lot of that comes from the ability to just like chase down any unit, and it gets the same damage potential when it's moving that it has when it's standing still. And I think therein lies the best opportunity to make some adjustments to this vehicle, so that like you're not as incentivized to just drive on top of your opponent's units when you're trying to use this. Yeah, you should be encouraged to be aggressive with it, but there needs to be some kind of penalty for attacking units while on the move. Because right now there's, outside of fear of a snare, there's really nothing stopping a player that's using a Wehrmacht from just driving on top of your line units. So I don't love this dynamic. If that meant like giving it a little bit more damage or accuracy when it's engaging from stationary at range, I think that would be actually fine. But it's the diving that I have a big problem with. And so I think the way to address it is either decreasing the burst duration when it's on the move, so it's not firing as many rounds in each burst while it's moving, or decreasing the accuracy on the move. Actually, I'm not sure. What is the accuracy of this thing on the move? I just want to check really quickly. The moving accuracy is 0.75, so it's pretty high. And the damage that it gets as it closes the gap is like quite good. So by closing the gap, even though you're losing a little bit of accuracy on the move, by getting closer, you're kind of mitigating that damage reduction that you would normally get from firing on the move. And so I just think like either reducing the accuracy or the burst duration on the move would be the best way to still make this unit like very strong at dealing with infantry, but making the oppressiveness of the dives less egregious. Like it's very difficult to counter like 3 Werbels driving into you at the moment. They can pump out a ton of damage, and once they get on top of you, they're pretty hard to fight. And so I think like basically there should be a small window while they're approaching that it's easier to deal with the damage that they're doing. And making the trade-off for moving and being super aggressive like that a little bit less intense. That's just my perspective. I feel the same about the AA Crusader, but the Werbel is more common, so that's why I'm calling it out specifically. So I think that would be good. And I also think that would open up the ability for them to move some more of the anti-infantry power into the Jaegers themselves. Because again, they're better than Grenadiers for sure in terms of DPS, but not by that much. They're just like, they're kind of just okay right now, and they're super expensive. So I'm not seeing a ton of them. So I think that would be a nice change as well. Bigger picture, I think things like, these are things that I think people were hoping for, but were not addressed in this patch, and probably won't be addressed until like the next major update. And it's a long list of things. And these are my perspectives, so take it with a grain of salt, but let me know in the comments if you agree. I'm kind of curious to see how everybody's feeling about some of these things. So starting with call-in units. I think call-in units just need to be moved into production buildings and require tech, period. Call-ins, like, they break the dynamic of a fundamental dynamic of RTS, which is around tech investment. And the things that you can accomplish with like the super high tempo strategies, using call-ins, best example I can think of is like using a heavy tier 2 play with like Werbels and stuff, and then just calling in a King Tiger or a Tiger, and not requiring tier 4. Like that, it feels pretty terrible to play against, and it breaks a lot of the typical rules of an RTS, which means like you need to tech up in order to get access to your late game units. And right now you don't need to do that. You can have the best of both worlds. You can overinvest in your early game units and then just call in units later on to make up for the differences in your roster. And I just think it's toxic and it needs to change. Next, DAC and combined arms. I think DAC needs like a complete rework. I don't like the combined arms mechanic. I think the way it's implemented is very toxic, and it provides way too many bonuses to infantry that are just near vehicles for really no like micro attacks. And it causes this dynamic where they're super weaker in small game settings and super powerful in team game settings because it's so easy to get the bonuses, especially because you get it from teammates' vehicles too. So I would kind of like to see them reworked. I don't really like the dynamic where like their infantry are more expensive, but also like not very good unless you have combined arms. I don't know. It needs a lot of changes. There are some things that I think are cool about DAC, but I don't know, the armory system, combined arms, like I think all that stuff needs another look because it creates some dynamics that are pretty frustrating to play against. And it makes the skill ceiling for DAC, especially in small games, it makes it high. But in team games, it feels low. Like it feels very easy to execute with DAC. And I don't think that was the intended design. So heavies, kind of related to call-in units. I just don't think, I mean, specifically like call-in heavies, I think they need to be gated behind tech. And in some ways made a little bit more accessible. Like, I don't see a ton of Pershings or Black Princes. I see a lot of Tigers. I don't see that many King Tigers because the CPs have been pushed out so far. But, like, the DAC Tiger we see all the time. So I would sooner, like, have the CP cost maybe reduced a little bit and then gate it behind tier 4 and maybe increase the cost of all of them because they are pretty cheap. Like, outside of the DAC Tiger being $245, they're not like super expensive, but the problem is they come out so late that usually your opponent has like a mass medium blob by the time they come out, and they're very difficult to actually get value out of. So maybe reducing the CP cost and putting them behind tier 4 would be the best way to deal with it. Next, I think the pathing. So one of the things that I feel like is missing from Co 3 is the vehicle, like the ability for vehicles to block each other. And I think it was in the game early on, but they changed it so that vehicles had a much easier time phasing through each other. And it just like, it doesn't feel good to play with or against. Like and I've been talking about this for a long time, like your vehicles are pretty effectively used in just a big blob. You put them in one control group and you right click them around, and that is the most effective way to use your vehicles right now. They don't get stuck on each other, they don't get caught, they don't get blocked. And in Co 2, it was happening all the time. And so you didn't see these like massive medium blobs all the time because it was much more difficult to manage that volume of vehicles in a tight space. And so I think this needs to be looked at again. And also like the ability for vehicles to block each other. Like some of the coolest plays that I remember watching in Co 2, especially, were like when a player managed to like block the retreat path of an opposing vehicle and, you know, kind of like encircle them and, you know, finish them off with AT weapons or something like that. Like that's completely missing from this game. Vehicles just drive straight through each other all the time. And I also think it has a pretty like broken impact on the armor system as well. So it'd be really cool, I think, to like see some adjustments to the pathing so it's not so easy to maneuver like freaking like 5 or 6 tanks in one blob. I don't know how you guys feel about this, but I just think it kind of looks silly and feels bad to play against, especially. And it trivializes things like AT guns a lot of the time because you can just build like 5 mediums and run them over very easily. I think in general, like medium vehicles need either a cost increase or they need a what am I trying to say? They need a cost increase or a health reduction. Sorry, that's what I was trying to get at. They need a cost increase or a health reduction. They're too durable right now. Most of them take like 5 shots to kill for most AT weapons or tanks. And it feels really bad to play against when you have like 5 enemy tanks. Especially, this is also true with like light tanks like the DAC Car Armado tank blob. Super annoying. Just doesn't feel good. So I think like a cost increase, maybe a pop cap increase as well would be in order for the mediums just to make them feel more novel. I feel like they're all starting to feel pretty powerful. And once you get enough of them, it kind of just trivializes every other unit on the field. And I don't like that dynamic. It doesn't really feel good. We should be incentivized to play with combined arms. That should be like, you know, diverse strategic rosters that cover a lot of bases should be the best way to defeat your opponent, not just building a whole bunch of one strong unit like a, you know, 76 millimeter Sherman or P4s or P3s or whatever it is. And I think looking at the pathing, looking at the vehicle health, maybe the cost of the vehicles is probably the best way to do this. And kind of on related to that note, I feel like the TTK for infantry is still a bit too high. Cover is not as meaningful as I think it should be in a lot of cases. And I don't want it to go back to like KO2 necessarily. I do want like assault units to be much more viable, but I do feel like the health creep, damage reduction, like all these things coming in for all these different units, and then the general like performance of infantry against each other is just like there's no consistency in the how infantry deal damage to each other because of all the varying damage values and health values, and then factoring in like damage reduction and abilities and all this other stuff. Like it's all over the place. And so I think generally speaking, like the TTK could probably use another pass and maybe shortened a little bit so that cover engagements are more meaningful and more impactful and players are more incentivized to use cover, because right now it doesn't really feel like that. And the last thing is model caps. I've decided that I don't really like how model caps operate on grenades, on tank blasts, on artillery. Artillery, maybe I can understand because having, your squad get one shot from max range by an artillery unit would feel pretty terrible. But for things like grenades or like tanks, like you should be rewarded for flushing an opponent out with grenades or hitting them with a tank shell at like the perfect angle. And in KO2 and KO1, like you could kill entire squads with the right hit. And we're missing a little bit of that power fantasy, I feel like, in this game because of how the model caps work. I think Relic did a good job of like, they increased the model cap of a lot of the infantry units. So I think it would be very difficult to get like a lot of these one-shot wipe capabilities, but I think it should still be possible. No unit should be completely safe from a grenade or from a tank or whatever, just because they have enough models in the squad. It just doesn't make sense to me. So I think it needs to be removed. So yeah, those are my thoughts, guys. Like overall, great patch, like really well done. I can see the influence of Dumais and Faragi in here. I think they're doing a great job. I'm really excited for the next patch with all the content and hopefully some more sweeping system changes in here. But yeah, overall, very well done patch. I think this will make it very refreshing to go back and play some of the battle groups I haven't touched in a while. Hopefully play a lot more 1v1s where I'm not running up against some of these really egregious, abusive strategies. So I'm looking forward to it. So hope you nerds enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.